Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. We're having a look at a suggestion passed to developers, and this is in December of 2023, and it's the Type 79. The reason why it gets its own video is there's a lot of information about this one, and it goes into some kind of interesting history about China, which I think is pretty important since, at least when it comes to a lot of the conversations around this channel, I feel like some of Chinese history is not always talked about too much. So we're going to give it its own video, we're going to have a look at it and go through it. So this is the suggestion for the Type 79. In 1956, 3 years after Joseph Stalin had died, Nikita Khrushchev's speech denouncing Stalin and also Stalinism sent a shockwave through much of the Eastern Bloc, but the reaction was even stronger in China. This speech especially concerned Mao, who began to see that Khrushchev would not be like his predecessor and not emulate Stalin or his own take on political policy. Relations would really sour in 1958 when Mao accused Khrushchev of trying to control the PRC's coastline by deterring US intervention in East Asia via submarines. Despite this tension between the two allies going on, the Soviets continued to supply military aid and advisors to China. The most significant of this military aid in terms of Chinese armored history is the T-54A, along with its license. It was produced in China and used in the People's Liberation Army service as the Type 59. This was produced in factories using Soviet parts to start, but would gradually shift to be made entirely of Chinese parts. The Soviets had given the Chinese a license to produce it, as well as translated documents and blueprints. It was a very capable tank for the time, armed with a 100mm rifled gun, strong armor, and also decent mobility. However, above all, it was easy to produce in large numbers, which was perfect for Chinese industry and also the People's Liberation Army. Even though the Type 59 was still rather adequate for the time, things were not looking good for the Sino-Soviet relationship. Khrushchev and Mao were not getting along, which resulted in the Soviet Union withdrawing its technical staff and advisors entirely by the early 1960s. China could certainly continue producing the Type 59 without the Soviets, but the problem was, what would succeed the Type 59? China didn't have years of knowledge or the capability as major nations like the Soviet Union or the United States did to create new and also improved tanks. The Type 59 couldn't last forever. China's tank industry would stagnate, and with this in mind, in 1963, the People's Liberation Army ordered a new tank design to be developed off the Type 59, which would be called the Type 69. Developmental objectives were set forth in 1965, with the industrial name WZ-121 being used for the new vehicle. And in 1966, the first prototype rolled out of the factory. This would unfortunately have to be put on the back burner, because in 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, which would severely halt development of the PRC's new tank. As the late 1960s came along, tensions with the Soviet Union were only getting worse, and even with Khrushchev now deposed and replaced by Leonid Brezhnev, things were about to take a violent turn at the border. While the Cultural Revolution was going on at home, tension was brewing between the Chinese and the Soviets on the eastern border of China. Each side made provocative but not overly lethal attacks against one another. Soviet boats would often spray Chinese fishermen with a water hose, and there were often hand-to-hand fights between soldiers on both sides. These aggressive acts were partially a result of an escalation in Soviet troops, itself being due to the PRC stating it did not recognize the 19th century borders between the current PRC and also the USSR. This then prompted the Soviets to send 250,000 to 300,000 soldiers on the border with China by 1967. These aggressive moves finally came to a head on the 2nd of March 1969, when fighting broke out on Zenbo Island, also known as Damansky Island. This is a small island on the Ussuri River, situated between Heilongjiang Province and Primorsky Krai. Each side claims a different version of events, but most historians agree the Chinese acted first in an ambush on Soviet border guards. Shooting ensued, followed by artillery fire and even T-62 tanks from the Soviet side. This was a rare sight at the time, as the T-62 back then was still something of a mystery to even Western analysts. Regardless, one T-62, numbered 545, under the command of Colonel Democrat Leonov, was ambushed, and in a panic drove into an anti-tank minefield with one of the tracks blowing off, leaving the tank immobilized on the ice. The crew tried to escape the tank, but Leonov and the loader, Alexei Kuzmin, were killed by Chinese sniper fire upon exiting the tank's hatches, and the driver and gunner most likely being killed later. Both sides continued to shoot at each other for control of the tank. When the Chinese attempted to take it, the Soviets would fire at them with artillery and sniper fire. When the Soviets tried to take it, the Chinese would fire back in kind. Eventually, the Chinese managed to pull the immobilized tank out of the ice, but at a heavy cost of men. Once taken back for study, it was thoroughly examined, and a few components, such as the lunar IR system, were copied to be put on the Type 69 with this new technology. The new tank would also finally be approved for production in the 26th of March 1974, as the 1969 Type medium tank as a literal translation from Chinese. It was China's first tank it produced by itself after nearly 10 years of development. With a new 100mm smoothbore gun, the Type 69 fired APFSDS-T ammunition as well as Heat-FS, which were quite an upgrade in firepower over the previous 100mm rifled gun of the Type 59. The 69 was certainly far from perfect, though. Its penetration and accuracy was a questionable improvement over the Type 59. It still had no modern fire control system in an era where vehicles like the T-72 were beginning to enter service, and its armor was still the same as the Type 59's. However, during the time the Type 69 was entering service, the political landscape of the Cold War was beginning to shift in the direction that might just allow China to improve the Type 69 design. The 1972 visit of Richard Nixon to China was a surprise to many, not only because Nixon was about as anti-communist as you could get, but also because up until this point, the US had not recognized the PRC at all. This was partially due to the American table tennis team's visit to China in 1971 and the following events, named Ping Pong Diplomacy. The 1972 visit began to open up relations with the West for China. This notably also involved the signing of the Shanghai Communique, which pledged that it was in the best interest of the world that the United States and China work towards normalizing relations, and would lead to the US officially recognizing the People's Republic of China in 1979. This would lead to a general warmth in relations with the West for China, which also meant Western technology and companies began to look for business in China. For the People's Liberation Army, this came in the form of Western technology. One thing long desired by the PLA was upgrading of older tanks in service with the PLA already, whether it was new main guns, fire control systems, missile systems. A flurry of new weapons were now able to be applied to PLA military vehicles. While a lot of these vehicles were certainly helped by Western technology, credit should also be given to Chinese engineers for applying it to these designs, and even creating new designs. During this time, there were a number of projects going on to modernize China's tank force. One of these modernization programs was for the Type 69, which would receive its most prominent upgrade in 1981, known as the Type 69-3, or more commonly, the Type 79. By the 1980s, the Type 69 was no longer what it was when it first entered service. It now used a 100mm rifled gun instead of a smoothbore gun. There were several changes made following the warming of relations with the West, and the vehicle was beginning to see a lot of success in the export market. But Chinese designers wanted to take it one step further by creating an upgrade of the Type 69-2, one of the latest variants to be called Type 69-3. This task was undertaken by the China North Industries Corporation, later known as Norinco. A prototype was created in 1981 based off a converted Type 69 2M, with some parts absorbed from the Type 59's improvement program, the Type 59-2. Two prototypes of the Type 69-3 were produced in 1983, followed by extensive trials. Various performance tests were carried out, such as driving on roads, laser rangefinder performance tests, firing live ammunition, electromagnetic interference protection tests, and also night vision distance testing. In accordance with the requirements of the People's Liberation Army Armored Forces, the Type 69-3 also underwent environmental tests in winter and also summer conditions, traveling a range of 1,000 kilometers. The test proved that the tank met the requirements, and the first production vehicle was created in 1984. On the 1st of October of the same year, the Type 69-3 participated in the 35th National Day Military Parade. In January of 1986, the National Military Product Designation Committee approved the design, finalized it, and then renamed it to the Type 79 medium tank. Compared to the Type 69, the Type 79 main battle tank had significant improvements in firepower, fire control system, special protection, communications, and also more. Some of these included rubber-padded tracks, automatically closing hatches upon detection of NBC agents, passive IR sights, a British Marconi FCS with a TLRLA laser rangefinder, BCLA ballistics computer, and TGSA gunner sights, and also most notably a new Type 83 105mm rifled gun. The new 105mm meant it could fire much more powerful ammunition, notably APFSDS and HEAT-FS rounds. It also received a new fire control system made by Marconi of the UK, featuring a digital ballistics computer, laser rangefinder, stabilization, and a system response time not exceeding 10 seconds. The first shot rate of the vehicle was over 80% at a distance of 1,000 meters, and the vehicle received second-generation low-light night vision equipment. Some areas actually claim it received thermal imaging later on its service life as well. Protection-wise, most changes were to reactions to the environment. For example, if the vehicle detects radiation or gamma rays, the vehicle will send out an alarm signal and immediately close all hatches on the tank, including any vision ports. Following this, the fan begins to work to keep polluted air out of the vehicle. The automatic fire suppression system can detect the source of a fire in 10 milliseconds and put it out in 60 milliseconds, in case the tank is hit or is caught on fire. The tank is also able to inject diesel fuel into its exhaust to create a smokescreen. In terms of mobility, the vehicle sports an engine of 730 horsepower. However, some sources claim it uses a 580 horsepower 12150L 7BW diesel engine instead. The vehicle is said to be able to go up to 50 kilometers an hour on the road and also has a maximum distance of 500 kilometers an hour. As with many other nations, China would reuse its vehicles for various roles, and the Type 79 was no different. Development of the Type 79 continued after its introduction into service, and in the same year it was introduced, a prototype known as the Type 79-2 was built. This featured new thermal imaging, improved stabilization, smoke grenade launchers, and perhaps most notably visually, slat basket armor on the rear and side of the turret. Not much else is known of it, but a couple of photos do exist. Whatever may have happened to the Type 79-2, it still would help the Chinese test new technology for the Type 79 successors, the Type 80 and also 88 series, which would eventually replace it in the latter part of the 80s. Also, originally, one of China's main armored recovery vehicles was the Type 653, which used a Type 69 chassis. When the Type 79 came about, it was later replaced by the Type 79 chassis, whose slightly better mobility further assisted in helping getting tanks out of tough spots. Equipped with a dozer blade and a hydraulically powered crane, the Type 84 is still in use today. And then also, perhaps the most famous of the Type 79's derivatives is the PGZ-88. It was used in limited evaluation trials and equipped in small quantities by PLA armoured brigades and also divisions, but was not seen as a satisfactory vehicle long-term. Despite this, it was one of China's first modern anti-aircraft systems, developed in the 1980s by Norinco. The PGZ-88 utilized a pair of Type 74 37mm cannons derived from the Soviet 61K anti-aircraft guns, and modified to a higher fire rate, with estimates going as high as 480 RPM compared to the 61K's fire rate of 160 RPM. As well as better armament, the PGZ-88 was also equipped with a target searching and range-finding radar, optical sighting, a ballistic computer, as well as a friend or foe transmitter and receiver. The vehicle could fire a high explosive round, known as the Type 76 in single shots, burst or fully automatic from one or both barrels at a muzzle velocity of 1,000 meters per second. The Type 79, for all its history and background, was not a major success because in the end it was not wielded in large amounts by the PLA. But it was a success in that it was an important stepping stone in the history of Chinese armored history, as it would lead to the Type 80, 85, and also 88 series of tanks. And of course, in War Thunder, therefore, it should also be added alongside all of the other vehicles that are already around for China. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Schnitzel Stroker, Brendan Quinn, Vilneus, Character Fuel, Carrion Crow, Nicholas Richardson, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, B. Young, Opium Prime, Masonocrat, Lafouche, Alan Hacker, Sem Arslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.